Okay, ladies and gentlemen. It's all on, is it? It's already on. Good stuff. Excellent. Okay, sorry to interrupt. I know there's a lot of good-going discussions happening. Hopefully, before too long, we'll allow you back to those, as networking is certainly part of the purpose of this evening. For those who don't know me, I am Liam MacArthur. I am the MSP for Orkney, and for the purposes of this evening, more relevantly, I am the member in charge of the putative bill on assisted dying for terminally ill adults with capacity that we hope to introduce into Parliament early in 2023. A very warm welcome to all of you. I know that parliamentary business overrunning, COVID hangovers and train disruption has accounted for various colleagues who would have been here this evening. But I'm delighted to see such a good turnout and very grateful to you for taking the time to be here. I will try to avoid this sounding like my version of an Oscar speech, but there are a few folks I do want to thank. Firstly, can I thank all of my MSP colleagues who are here in huge numbers, not just because there is a very impressive drinks trolley sitting over there in the corner, but I have to say that the cross-party support on this issue, not just in relation to this attempt at changing the law, but in early attempts, has been phenomenal. It's a support that will be needed, obviously, in taking forward any proposals, but from a personal perspective, it's a support upon which I lean very heavily. I'm very grateful for the advice, for the counsel, for the sharing of frustrations, but that support has been invaluable, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you for that support. Can I thank also the campaign groups, to Dignity in Dying, to Humanist Society Scotland, and to Friends at the End. I know you are well represented here. It's great to see so many of you here. But can I draw out in particular Saoirse Hume from Fate, Fraser Sutherland from Humanist Society Scotland, and Ali Thompson, who unfortunately, due to COVID, isn't able to be here from Dignity in Dying, but who have done so much to support the work in taking forward the proposals that went out to consultation last year, and again in supporting and advising me, and I'm enormously grateful to them and to their teams. Can I thank the members of the Medical Advisory Group that has been set up to again look into some of the issues that this bill gives rise to, or these proposals give rise to, in more detail, and make sure we get that detail right, because that is absolutely crucial in this. I know a number of members of the group are here this evening. I'm very grateful to them, and in particular to Sandis Gulhani, MSP, who has generously offered to chair that group and is doing an excellent job in doing so. Can I thank my team, to Amanda, to George, to Jack and to Maddie for the sterling work that they are doing in terms of processing the responses to the consultation, and again supporting me in all aspects of the work I'm doing, and also to the members of the Non-Government Bills Unit who quite appropriately said they couldn't be here this evening, which I entirely understand, but I wouldn't want the occasion to pass without putting on record my thanks to them for the work that they do. They do enormous work in supporting members, bringing forward bills on a range of different issues, and I think are one of the real unsung success stories of the Scottish Parliament. So look, why are we all here? We are here because 12 months ago today, I announced my intention to bring forward a bill in this session of Parliament to allow adults with a terminal illness and mental capacity the choice of an assisted death at the end of life. This is a cause that I have supported throughout the 15 years that I've been an MSP, and for many years indeed before that. Like you and so many people across Scotland, I have been immensely frustrated that we've not been able to make more progress so far. But I pay tribute to Jeremy Purvis, to Patrick Harvey, and to the late and long-missed Margot MacDonald for the enormous strides that they helped make in keeping this debate to the fore over recent years. And I firmly believe, and I've been having discussions with a number of you already this evening, I firmly believe that the political tide is now turning. We need to get the detail right, of course, but I get the sense that the political mood is finally at last catching up with where the public has been for some time and that the circumstances are right for that change in the law that's long overdue, keenly anticipated, and so desperately needed. We see that from the overwhelming support to the public consultation that I launched last September. While there's a limit to what I can say at this stage about that, my team and I are still finalising the responses that came in. But what I can say is that the level of interest has surpassed anything we've seen for a member's bill in the lifetime of this Scottish Parliament. Thanks to the heroics of my team, who are all here this evening, and the parliamentary officials who have been supporting us, I'm very confident that we'll be able to publish a summary of the consultation responses when Parliament returns after the summer recess in September, and I'll also confirm my intention to press ahead with introducing a Member's Bill to Parliament. Being permitted to do so will require cross-party support, but as you will see from the turnout this evening, that I don't think is a problem, and that support is indeed growing. This will then allow me to sit down with legal drafters and begin the process of drafting a bill. And as with processing the consultation responses, this will take time. However, it's more important that we get this right than we get it done by a specific time. Nevertheless, I would hope a bill can be formally introduced to Parliament early next year, at which point the committee and my MSP colleagues will begin their vital scrutiny work. I know that this is an issue that continues to divide opinion, giving rise to strong emotions on both sides. I've tried and will continue to try to take a pragmatic approach, listening to the voices of the terminally ill, as well as those who have concerns or who just have questions. I'm also determined to do what I can to lend weight to calls, very legitimate calls for increased investment in access to good quality specialist palliative care for those who need and want it. However, this is an opportunity that must be grasped. We've seen how the law has been safely and successfully changed in states and nations around the world. For me, this is the next great liberal reform, and in the interest of choice, dignity and compassion, the debate cannot be about whether, but rather how we change the law here in Scotland. But I'm keen to hear from our invited speakers here this evening. I'm very conscious that I've been lucky in having no direct personal experience of a family member or close friend who's suffered a protracted, painful or undignified death, or been forced to take matters into their own hands. We know, sadly, that for too many people in Scotland, however, each year that is a reality. I'm enormously grateful for all those who've come forward to tell their stories, share their experience, whether through the consultation, in correspondence with MSPs, or indeed through the media. And I'm particularly grateful to Joanne Easton for very kindly agreeing to be with us this evening and tell us about her late father, Robert. So over to you, Joanne. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm not a public speaker, so please do forgive me if I stumble my words or if I talk too fast. I would like to say, first of all, good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for attending this event. And I'm so very grateful to Liam for bringing this bill to the Scottish Parliament, and to Francis and Ali from Dignity in Dying for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all tonight about my dad and about how he died. And I would like to say at the outset that I'm so proud of Scotland. I'm so proud of being Scottish. My view of Scotland as a progressive, compassionate country, and if MSPs and the MSPs here tonight vote against this bill, my view of Scotland is blown to smithereens. So as Liam said, my name's Joanne Easton. My lovely dad was Robert Easton. I've brought a wee picture of him just to hold just now. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in February 2020, and we lost him on 21st of June 2021. It's a year ago today. So it's so poignant for me that the date of this event marks a year since I lost the best dad in the world. And it also shows how important this assisted dying bill is to me and to my family. I should be spending today with my mother and my sister, remembering my father and celebrating his wonderful person. but I'm standing here in front of all of you today speaking to you about this issue. My dad, Robert Easton, wanted the right to die. From the very outset in February 2020, when my dad was first admitted to hospital and it became clear the prognosis was far, far bleaker than the kidney stones we had first thought, dignitas was discussed. So there we were, my parents and my sister, sitting in a hospital room having received this devastating news. And my dad was already thinking about how he was going to end his story in his own terms. Choice and control were extremely important to my dad. My dad didn't want to die in a hospice, and he most definitely didn't want to die in hospital. Dying at home wasn't palatable to him either. And he had also strongly expressed the opinion that he didn't want his family, he didn't want me and my sister to witness him dying. And understandably as well, he didn't want to suffer. And he wanted to spare his family the pain and trauma of witnessing his pain and trauma. My dad was strong. My dad was brave. My dad was a protector. And my dad was going to lose all of this. And indeed, watching his illness progress, it was heartbreaking for everyone who loved him. My dad lost so much of himself. He couldn't ride his motorbikes any longer. He was in pain constantly. He was depressed. He wouldn't speak to my mum for days. Even when he was spending precious time with his family, particularly his beloved grandchildren, the pain was clear for everyone to see. So I think that taking back control was very important to my dad because he lost so much control after his illness was diagnosed and as it progressed. And I think, personally, it would have meant a lot for him to be able to at least control his death. My dad did soldier on for a few months after he stopped treatment, but I feel that his heart had died a long time before his body did. My dad was in mental anguish as well as physical pain for every remaining day of his life. And all he wanted was to be able to make the choice to end his life at the time of his choosing and without causing any further trauma to his family. But he couldn't, because this bill didn't pass back in 2015. And because assisted dying didn't pass in 2015, my dad asked my boyfriend Scott and I to investigate methods of suicide. There's a lot to think about here. The method couldn't cause any trauma for whoever found him, couldn't be too difficult, couldn't implicate Scott and myself. I mean, the lack of safeguards here, it was terrifying. So we looked at dignitas. We learned how to rig up an exit bag, and you might want to remember those words, exit bag, if this bill doesn't pass. We also investigated suicide methods. And some of the methods that my dad has spoken about were brutal. And this research, it was awful to carry out. Terminally ill people should not be forced down to the woods with a length of rope. Terminally ill people should not need to jump in front of trains. Terminally ill people should not have to estimate the best type and quantity of drugs required to kill themselves. So finally, Scott and I started researching what drugs would be best to kill a person, and I got on the dark web. I'm a technophobe, so this required setting up a VPN, using, I don't even know, I managed to find a drug marketplace, and I could have bought the drugs, obviously, illegally. So there was a big problem there. So again, I asked, where are the safeguards? Where's the safeguards for me? I've got diagnosed depression to protect my mental health when I was looking at these triggering suicide websites. Where was the safeguards to protect Scott if you had to buy drugs from my dad? And where's the safeguards for my dad? Where's the safeguards for my dad in ensuring that his chosen method would work and would leave him with some dignity in death? As matters stand, and without this bill, there are no safeguards. There are none for anyone in Scotland, be they terminally ill or the loved one of a terminally ill person. And I think part of what made my story resonate is my openness to talk about what I was willing to do for my dad to give him the peaceful death that he so desired. And due to the risk of criminal prosecution, secrecy is paramount for people wanting to help their loved one end their life in their own terms. It was a lonely time, lonely experience, and after my dad died, it was Francis from Dignity in Dying, who was the first person that I spoke to openly about everything that had went on. You know, my mum and my sister didn't know anything about it. I couldn't tell any of my work about it, who had been fantastic, supporting me through everything. I couldn't tell them. So yeah, it was just mental. It felt like I was living in a TV show at some point. I was thinking, this isn't my life. How's this happened? And the trauma that would follow if I had actually helped my dad end his life. I mean, can you imagine? Would I tell my mum and my sister that I was involved? Would it blow my remaining family to smithereens? 3 years left, what's going to happen? And if I didn't tell them, could I cope with keeping that a secret? What would happen if a post-mortem was going to get carried out? Would I be ultimately facing a murder charge? So in the end, my dad saw the effect this was having on me and Scott, because he's my dad, he loved me, he didn't want to hurt me, he didn't want to put us through any trauma. So he stopped talking about ending his own life. My dad passed away in the Kilbride Hospice in East Kilbride at sunrise on the day of the summer solstice, just one day before his 70th birthday. We spent a lovely Father's Day together as a family, looking at old photos and sharing a lovely afternoon tea put on by the amazing hospice staff. I held my dad's hand, the dad of my childhood. I saw him, he opened his eyes, and I looked at him, and for just a moment I saw him there again, and it was the dad of my childhood, the dad before he fell ill, my amazing dad who looked after us and loved us all for every day of his life. And I then had to go home because there wasn't any family room available at the hospice, and we knew my dad didn't want my sister and I in the room when he died. But thankfully, my dad's passing was peaceful and it was relatively pain-free, but the brutal fact remains, a lingering death in a hospice after so many months of physical and mental pain, it just wasn't how he wanted to go. And just a few days before he passed, he told one of the hospice nurses if there was a wee pill that he could take right at that moment that would just end it, he would take it. And it breaks my heart. I just wish I'd bought the drugs. So to all the MSPs in the audience, and thank you again so much for being here, I want to leave you with this image. If assisted dying had passed in 2015, I wouldn't be standing here telling you about my dad's traumatic death. I'd be telling you about Robert, a loving father and grandfather, a motorbike enthusiast, a firefighter for all of his career, a domestic god. It was just brilliant for my mum. I'd be able to tell you how he spent the last few months of his life sharing precious memories and making precious memories with his family, with his wee nephew that had just been born, with his wee niece who was 5 years old, who loved her granda Robert. But I can't do that, and I can't do that because he was denied that choice by the law. You have before you, MSPs have before you now, you have the chance to rewrite stories like my dad's. And when you're considering this legislation, please hold my dad in your mind and think about the families across Scotland suffering before you cast your vote. Thank you.
Well done. God, I don't think I'm going to get through this evening, frankly. Look, Joanne, that was so powerful. Your father, Robert, would be enormously proud. We need to get palliative care and access to palliative care right. We need to get safeguards right, but we need to recognise that at the moment, as Joanne said, there are no safeguards for so many people. The current law is absolutely unsustainable in that respect. And for those that argue that hard cases make bad law, they need to recognise that bad law makes hard cases, and I think we've just heard evidence of that. We're now going to hear from one of my colleagues, Eleanor Whittam, MSP, who's elected as the member for Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley at the election last year. She has been a passionate advocate of these proposals since she came into the Parliament. She's been an invaluable source of inspiration and guidance. And she's told her story before, but I'm hoping she'll tell her story again, share the experience of her mother with us. So Eleanor, the floor is yours.
I don't know about the rest of you, but Joanne's testimony there really got me, and it made me remember the day that my mum died. My mum's name was Irene MacLeod, and this is my mum with my wee sister. Unfortunately, we lost my wee sister as well to cot death when she was 7 months old, and we've got a big painting that one of our friends did of a black and white photo my dad took of my mum and my sister, and this is a wee picture of them. So my mum, Irene, died at 58, 5 weeks after she was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And she didn't die with dignity. She died surrounded with her family, my dad, my 2 brothers, myself, her 2 sisters. And we loved her as much as we could in the 3 days that we were by her bedside after she lapsed into unconsciousness. But the day, about an hour before my mum became unconscious, she sent me a text message and said to me, "Elena, can you come to the hospital?" And I says, "Mum, I'm going to get there as soon as I finish my work. Don't worry, I'm coming. Dad's away home. He's just going to have a shower. I'm coming, spending the night, and my dad will be back in the morning." And she messaged me again, "Elena, when you coming?" And I said, "I'm just finishing, I'm just coming." When I got there, my mum was unconscious. And my mum only regained consciousness for a brief moment the morning that she died to tell us that she loved us. But in those moments where she told us that she loved us, I could see the immense fear because she actually woke up and she thought, "Shit, I'm not dead. Oh my God, I have to face this, confront the fact that I'm not dead," and watch my family round about me in absolute turmoil at that point. Now, whilst I think we were delighted that she told us she loved us, because, I have immense guilt about the fact I didn't drop everything and run to the hospital that night, I have guilt for a lot of other reasons now. My mum died on the 23rd of March in 2014. My dad's birthday was the 24th, so we did have a wee joke and said at least she didn't die on my dad's birthday, because that's what got us through it, was black humour, was that, humour where, you have to laugh because things are just so horrible. Now, like Joanne, my mum did not want to die in hospital. She did not want to die in a hospice. She would have preferred to die at home, but she didn't want to do that either because of the trauma that would associate with a home for everybody else for there afterwards. And when I was growing up, my mum never shied away from talking about dying. She told us all the time, "Don't let me suffer. Give me the big blue pill or the wee blue pill." Now, unfortunately, there was no wee blue pill at the time when my mum died. And the only option available to my mum, because she couldn't breathe, it was lung cancer and it was terminal, and she was terrified. She had to go into hospital because she needed 24-hour oxygen just to be able to survive. The only thing open to my mum was to starve herself and not drink. So in those 5 weeks, my mum, who was only a wee tiny 5 foot, lost 4 stone, went through immense pressure because her whole body would have been telling her to have a drink. And she got really clever at hiding it from us. I can see back now, and I knew what she was doing looking back. She was making out as if she drank, and she was filling the cup up with tissues, and she was hiding it. And the night that I went to the hospital when she was unconscious, and the nurse that was on that shift finally said what my mum was doing, because she didn't want to tell us. She didn't want to terrify us. She didn't want to worry us. So we didn't have any idea that she was starving herself and that she was not drinking so that she could hasten her death, because there was no other option available to my mum. Now, she died and we were playing music because music was my mum's life. I grew up, my mum used to do the housework listening to Ozzy Osbourne, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. Right? Her friends were bikers. That's where we grew up in Canada, and there was always bikers around the house, and it was just a wonderful place to grow up. It was a wonderful childhood I had. She taught me to love bees and go out after a rainstorm and find all the bumblebees and bring them in and feed them, because she was that type of person. She was a strong, loving person that was focused on social justice and making sure that we all lived the best life that we could. And she loved her children. She loved her grandchildren. Her funeral was stowed. There was not enough space. There was over 300 people at it because she was just one of those people that touched everybody. But at the end of the day, I couldn't help my mum. I couldn't help her. I couldn't do anything to make that easier for her. And all she did to try and make it easier for us was to keep that to herself. Imagine what that did to her during that time. Imagine what it did to my dad. I ruined their life because they became pregnant with me at 17, right? So that's the family story. But, she told me I didn't really ruin her life. I was the beginning and the start of her life, because that was what was important to her, was family. And I feel now, 8 years on, that I failed my mother. So I'm here to ask my fellow colleagues, MSPs and everybody else, to really look at Liam's bill when it comes before the Parliament. Look into your heart. And do we want people to continue to suffer? My best friend in Canada, her mum has just been diagnosed with terminal abdominal cancer. And we were talking last night, and she says, Helena, she goes, we're not terrified. We're worried about what's in front of us and the horrible fact that my mum has this diagnosis. But as soon as she was diagnosed, we all looked at each other as a family and said, right, we can have a plan because it's available in Canada. Medical assisted death is available in Canada. So she's not terrified the same way that I was and that my mum was. So please, look into your heart, and thank you. And this is from my mum, Irene.
A powerful story, although there was a part of me that's still trying to get my head around what a house looks like that has been cleaned to the backdrop of Ozzy Osbourne and AC/DC. But anyway, listen, thank you again, Eleanor. I think those lived experiences are what have led the public to where they are on this issue, and I think increasingly it's what's leading many colleagues across the parties to come to the conclusion that what we have in place at the moment is not sustainable. I think whatever your views on this, whether you're opposed to it in principle or whether you support it, I would ask you to question the proposals, the proposals that I bring forward in the bill, test them to destruction. That is what we as MSPs have an absolute responsibility to do. As I said before, I am open to looking at ways in which we can improve these proposals. But what I'm not prepared to accept is that the status quo is adequate. It's not adequate in terms of Eleanor's mother, Joanne's father. It's not an adequate response to the constituents who come to us with cases where, despite the best efforts of those in our palliative care sector, who I would argue do world-leading work in many respects, yes, we can improve that, improve the access to it, but still there are those who get beyond the reach of palliative care and for whom the response at the moment is woefully, woefully inadequate. Our third speaker this evening has been disrupted by what is happening on our trains, unfortunately. Andrew O'Hagan, Scottish novelist, award-winning novelist, but probably more importantly for the purposes of this evening, a patron of dignity in dying, is going to speak to us about the way in which he's got involved with this issue, and I think going to read from his latest novel, Mayflies, which draws from his own personal experience of a close friend going through a bad death. So hopefully, if the technology works, I will hand over to Andrew O'Hagan. He's not quite with us yet. Right. Dipping into my repartee at this stage. I think we could pay. That's what we'll do. We'll reverse the order. So we're going to hear from another esteemed patron of dignity in dying, Patrick Stewart, who has recorded a short message for us, and that I think is ready to go fairly soon.
Dying people in Scotland should not be forced to die in pain against their wishes. I am asking members of the Scottish Parliament to support Liam MacArthur's assisted dying bill.
I can't deny there's a wee bit of me that had all goosebumply at the mention of my name by Patrick Stewart. Can we repeat that again, please? In fact, can we have it on a loop for the remainder of the evening? Is Andrew O'Hagan ready to go?
He's not.
Here, by popular demand, we can grab teas and coffees. You would have thought that after, 3 years of a hybrid system in the Parliament, I would have got sufficiently used to kind of extemporising and freewheeling it when the technology doesn't work. But I think we'll go for teas and coffees and drinks, and when Andrew is lined up... Oh, he's back. There you go. What's back on? I'm relying on Kenny Gibson.
Dying people in Scotland should not be forced to die in pain against their wishes. I am asking members of the Scottish Parliament to support Liam MacArthur's assisted dying bill.
Yeah, I know what I'm going to sleep to tonight. Okay, well, let's have some teas and coffees and drinks, and once we get Andrew lined up, we'll gather you back to hear Andrew reading from Mayflies and telling us about his connection with the campaign issue. But thank you all again for turning up in such large numbers. We really do appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed.